parenting is not easy. In fact, being parents ourselves, we know that parenting is not for the faint of heart, and that you've got to be strong, and that it is very difficult to go it alone and be able to keep up on everything that is happening. One thing, what I'm going to be talking about tonight is called Restorative Practices, and the reason that we're bringing it to your attention is because it is some new legislation that we want parents to be aware of, but it's also something that Davison was headed toward. We were probably looking at a full implementation about a year from now, and the legislation just sort of gave us a little boost and got us moving a little quicker. So I'm really pleased to be presenting this because it's something that I really believe is the right thing for kids. So this is just a quick overview about restorative practices. So first of all, one thing that we really have talked a lot about for probably the past 3 to 5 years is the importance of relationships in school. Right now, kids, society, we're probably more connected than we've ever been to people all around the world, and yet less connected than we've ever been to those that are right in the same room with us. And I see you shaking your heads. And knowing that you are our parents, and I am a parent, very often it's, okay, I could probably get a quicker answer from my teenager if I just texted the question to them rather than talking to them across the dinner table. Yes? Okay, so relationships, that face-to-face, that real relationship is something that is important. And in fact, it is something that now we really need to foster and intentionally teach, because it may not be happening just intuitively or just naturally because people get behind a screen, and then it's a totally different kind of relationship, which, you know, you're going to hear about some of the downfalls of that. So we've been talking as a district about the importance of building relationships within the school. Peer-to-peer relationships, peer-to-adult relationships, adult-to-adult relationships, that all of those different relationships that happen within a school system, because a school is basically a community. I mean, we've got almost 6,000 kids. That's a community every day that these students are coming to. So one thing we know, and this is just kind of to reach out and grab you right at the gut level, is that kids, people in general, we don't do our best work when we don't feel good. When we're not feeling good on the inside, for whatever reason, whether that's because of trauma or a specific, scenario that is happening at that given time in your life, if you're not feeling good, it's hard to do your best work, because our emotions really drive how we pay attention. And how we pay attention then drives how you're going to learn and grow. So we know that we've got to be teaching kids in a way that is, number one, sustainable, that is giving good role models and behavior that can be beneficial to them for the rest of their lives, but in a way that is not breaking them down at the same time. So we want to make sure that kids are behaving appropriately, but we need to do it in a way that can continue to build them up. So we have lived for the past several years under what I refer to as the crime and punishment regime. We've had zero tolerance for quite some time. And quite frankly, zero tolerance was a knee-jerk reaction to some really scary things that happened in our world, in our nation. And when scary things happen, we want to try and fix them fast, and we want to make sure that people are safe. So it is perfectly understandable in the the days after things like Columbine and Sandy Hook and things like that, that our states, our government, and so on went to a zero tolerance, because quite frankly, that was scary, and we needed to do something right away to try and make our schools safe. In retrospect now, after some years of living with this, we are collecting data, and we are seeing that we may have swung the pendulum a little too far. And as a parent, I don't know if that ever happens to you, but it does happen to me. You're going along, and then all of a sudden kids start doing something, and you think, I got to put the hammer down. You swing the pendulum all the way over here, and things get worse, and after a little bit of time, you try and come back to the middle. What we have found after some time to study the zero tolerance policies is that instead of decreasing the discipline and teaching those kids a lesson, we actually have increased suspensions and expulsions. It backfired on us a little bit. And so we've got some really scary data. A single suspension in the 9th grade is associated with a 32% risk of dropping out. That's scary for me as an educator and as a parent. The dropout rate for a student who has only been suspended once is doubled that when compared to those who have not been suspended. With that in mind, we have to be considering very, very carefully when we need to suspend a kid and when we need to do something different. So I always go back, and when I was a principal at Hahn for about 11 years, I always used to go back to this with my teachers. The word discipline comes from the root word disciple, and if you look up the word disciple in the dictionary, it says to teach. Discipline is not synonymous with punishment, even though somehow that's how it sort of has happened for all of us. Discipline means to teach, and we want to be able to teach kids the appropriate way to behave so that it is sustainable and actually makes a change. As opposed to what very often happens, if a student is kicked out of school for a suspension, very often that student is a teenager. Mom and dad are working because that's what we have to do. And so the kiddo is watching The Price is Right all day long or whatever else may be happening because they're probably not sitting and thinking about what they did to get there, you know? So I see you shaking your head, you're getting this. So we want to use every opportunity that we can because we're a school, we teach, we learn, to teach kids in every situation possible. So we look at restorative practices, and you may have heard of restorative justice. That is becoming something that is used often in the judicial system, and that is where this comes from. Looking at the idea that people in general, whether it's students or adults, work better in a situation where you are working together toward a common goal instead of having somebody do something to you or for you. And that's what we want to end up with for kids. We want them working with us instead of us always having to do things to them or for them. So that's kind of the premise of this. So restorative practices, the philosophy here is we want to be real careful. We don't want to send a message that it is okay to do things wrong and we're going to just look the other way, because that's not the case at all. Instead, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we set up a system, a community, where when someone makes a mistake, that wrongdoer has the opportunity to be accountable and to also try to repair that harm that has been done, whether that is some kind of maybe harm that is actually done to property, or is it harm to a relationship that needs to be repaired. We want to make sure that we set up a community that is safe and recognizes the need to keep all the people safe in that community, but also builds a relationship that understands that if you make a mistake, you accept responsibility for your mistake, but you are still welcome back into the community. Excuse me. And then we want to work on competency development so that kids are learning and growing in their pro-social behavior skills, both for the wrongdoer and for those who have been harmed in a situation. One thing that I go back to is I think about when I was a kid, or you've seen scenarios on movies and stuff, and some kids are outside and they're playing baseball, and you hit the baseball into the neighbor's window, and the window gets broken, and instead of suspending you, your mom or dad march you over to the neighbor's house, and you know, they're standing next to the kiddo, and the kiddo's, you know, you got to apologize to Mr. Smith. I'm sorry I broke your window. You know, you got to take responsibility for it. And Mr. Smith says, well, you know, I accept your apology. Why don't you come over on Saturday and we'll work to fix that window together? And then suddenly that kid has been given the opportunity to accept responsibility, but they've also been given the opportunity to make the situation right. And most likely, very often, the relationship with the Mr. Smith is even stronger than it was before that happened, because now you've spent a little side-by-side time with an adult doing something together, and you've probably learned some really cool things in the meantime. So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. So the big idea behind restorative practices are that you are giving the student the opportunity to repair the harm and to build and restore the relationship that was broken within the community. There is a wide range of restorative practices that we are implementing here at school, and I'll show you, we've got many things that were already in place, but we've already seen some real differences in students and adults in just a short period of time. What happens is, if there is an issue that maybe there was some infraction of whatever rule there that might be, we have an opportunity where the student is sitting, and everyone's sitting possibly in a circle, and the student has an opportunity to look at everyone who was affected by that particular infraction. On one occasion, I can think of that infraction, the circle included a custodian, it included a coach, it included an athletic director, and the student got to accept responsibility for their actions, and they also got to talk and hear how their actions affected every single one of those people. And there was a dialogue back and forth, and that student got to listen to the very, very important supportive adults in their life say, yeah, you kind of screwed up, and it wasn't cool, but you know what? I appreciate you accepting responsibility. I still care for you. I still want you to be successful. And then together, the student and those people who are all involved develop a plan for what the student is going to do to make it right. And there have been some really cool things. And when kids are given the opportunity to do that, they come up with some really fabulous ideas and things that we certainly wouldn't think of, you know, cleaning up or helping a custodian to clean up football fields, or coming up with some special public service announcements to use on our DTV for younger kids, different things like that. And that is really so much more productive than staying home and watching The Price is Right on a few days out of school. And it really makes an impact. So things that we already had in place that would be considered restorative practices. The restorative philosophy is really a way of doing business. It's that community, it's that building of relationships. And then things that support that are things like our positive behavior interventions, our cardinal code. Sometimes we come up with specific behavior plans for some kiddos, and they help us develop those plans of how they're going to be successful and what support they need in order to do that. Behavior contracts, community service. We've got champs in several of our buildings. Chill cards. You know, we really, this is something that we use a lot with kids from itty bitty all the way up through our high schoolers. And really, it's a way of advocating for kids to take a break themselves. I talked with kids about the fact that lots of times adults, very, very powerful adult CEOs, they know how to take a break when they're in a heated meeting and something's not going their way. They've learned strategies, whether that's I've got to go get a cup of coffee, or I have to take this call when really no one's calling at all. And they learn how to remove themselves and take a little break. Kids need to know how to do that too. So we have chill cards where they can just kind of show the card to a teacher. There's not a lot of discussion. They just kind of go out into the hallway, get a drink, walk it off, come back in. It takes 2 to 3 minutes, regroup, and get back into it. And learning how to do those things. check in, check out, where kids may have be assigned a mentor, a go-to person that they go to first thing in the morning and talk about how the morning went. And that person may say, you know, hey, did you eat this morning? How you feeling? You got that homework? I know you had a test you needed to study for. Do you feel good? Kind of get them charged up for the day. They go about their day. And then at the end of the day, they can touch base with that person again. And that person can give them, hey, you made it through the day. You got everything for your homework. Here we go. So we're trying, you know, this check-in, check-out kind of thing. Having planned discussions with kids. We know that nobody likes to be called out and embarrassed in front of their peers. So when something is happening, maybe rather than addressing it right at that minute, if you think that it's going to kind of lead to something a little bit bigger, you schedule a time for a planned discussion where you can sit down and talk about what's going on and really work out and hear both sides of it. And then reintegration plans. Quite frankly, sometimes there are certain things that will lead to an out-of-school suspension. We have to keep the safety and welfare of all people, all the children, everybody involved. But if there is a time out of school, knowing what that does to a student and knowing how that may raise anxiety, it may have a big impact on their grades, we're going to plan for the reintegration back into school and what that looks like, so that we can plan for possibly any of their concerns and anxieties and things like that to be as successful as possible. Some things that we're going to be working more on and adding and trying to incorporate even more community service, making things right. And what can you do? You know, if the behavior that was exhibited took time from the class or took time from the teacher, what can you do to make that right then with your class or with your community within the room? Different conferences, different kinds of conflict resolution, restitution, restorative circles. I kind of hit on as far as, you know, talking in a circle and everyone involved and coming up with a plan that everyone can agree with. And so these are all things that we are learning about, getting training on. The staff is getting more and more training, and we discuss these all monthly at administrative meetings and counselor meetings, and then work with our staff on them. So what we are looking toward is making sure that, you know, when kids leave us, that they can be contributing members of society, using a restorative philosophy, and of course looking at everything from academics, attendance, behavior, and our school climate to make sure that this is a place where we are educating the whole child and making sure that they are ready to step out into society. So thank you very much. I'm going to let you stand up for a quick little break because you need it while we kind of transition and get the next slides and things set up for you. Thank you.